Imagine a world where the seas rose higher than mountains, where entire civilizations vanished beneath waves, and where humanity's survival hung by a fragile thread of chance. Could it be possible that the flood myths, echoed in whispers from every corner of the ancient world, are more than mere stories? From the Bible's account of Noah's Ark, to the Mesopotamian Epic of Gilgamesh, to tales from Native American tribes, Aboriginal elders, and the ancient chronicles of India and China, cultures separated by oceans and centuries all tell of a catastrophic flood. Why? How could people so far apart, who never met, carry the same haunting memory? Was there truly a deluge that nearly wiped out early humanity? If so, what was the cause? Was it melting glaciers at the end of the Ice Age, the violent impact of a comet? Or something far more mysterious, something that archaeology has yet to uncover? Scientists, archaeologists, and historians have long debated these flood myths. Some dismiss them as symbolic tales, metaphors of rebirth, or warnings carved into the fabric of human imagination. Yet others believe they may preserve an echo of real events, ancient disasters etched into collective memory, retold through generations until myth became history and history became myth again. Tonight, we dive deep into this mystery. Together, we'll explore the dark truth behind the great flood myths, the scientific evidence, the archaeological clues, and the chilling possibility that our ancestors faced cataclysm on a scale almost beyond comprehension. This is not just a story about the past, it is a story about survival, about how prehistoric humans endured the Ice Age, how civilizations rose and fell, and how fragile our place in nature truly is. The flood is more than a myth. It may be a memory. When we peel away the poetry of myths, what remains? Are there traces of real events, geological, climatic, archaeological, that could explain why nearly every ancient culture remembers a devastating flood? To answer this, we must journey back to the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. This was a time when Earth was still shaking off the grip of frozen giants. Vast sheets of ice covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. The sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than today, and coastlines stretched far beyond what we know now. Humans, Neanderthals already gone, Homo sapiens thriving, were scattered in small tribes, hunting mammoths, gathering wild plants, carving tools from stone. But then came the thaw. Between 12,000 and 9,000 years ago, the planet's climate shifted dramatically. The ice sheets melted, rivers swelled, and oceans surged. Geological evidence shows sudden sea level rises, sometimes as much as several meters in just a few centuries. Imagine standing on a coastal plain where your ancestors had lived for generations, only to see the ocean devour it year after year. Entire landscapes were swallowed. For prehistoric humans, this was not an abstract phenomenon. It was the end of their world. Archaeologists point to the Younger Dryas, a mysterious cooling period around 12,900 years ago, followed by rapid warming. Some scientists suggest that a comet or asteroid impact may have triggered it, igniting wildfires, disrupting ecosystems, and destabilizing ice sheets. If this was true, then the melting aftermath could have unleashed catastrophic floods across the globe. Consider the Black Sea. Around 7,600 years ago, rising Mediterranean waters are believed to have breached the Bosporus Strait, flooding the basin and expanding it into the Black Sea we know today. Archaeologists have found evidence of ancient shorelines buried deep underwater, hinting at villages suddenly submerged. Could this event echo in Near Eastern flood myths like Noah's story? Or look to the Americas. Geological studies reveal that when glacial Lake Missoula collapsed in what is now Montana, walls of water hundreds of feet high tore through the land, carving canyons and reshaping the Pacific Northwest in a matter of days. To those who survived, it would have seemed like the wrath of the gods. And then there is the Indian Ocean. Off the coasts of India and Sri Lanka, sonar mapping has revealed ancient structures beneath the waves. Some researchers believe these could be the remnants of prehistoric settlements drowned by rising seas after the Ice Age. In India, myths of a sunken city called Dwarka align eerily with these findings. What is striking is not just the evidence of flooding, but the persistence of memory. Myths are not photographs of history. They are paintings, full of symbolism and exaggeration, but they often carry a seed of truth. When Mesopotamian scribes wrote of Gilgamesh's flood, or when Aboriginal Australians spoke of seas swallowing sacred lands, perhaps they were not inventing stories out of nothing. Perhaps they were remembering. For anthropology, this matters deeply. It suggests that myths are not only cultural artifacts, but also records of survival. The flood myths may represent humanity's first attempts to make sense of planetary chaos, to preserve through story the trauma of watching worlds vanish. Yet, the questions remain unsettling. Were these floods local disasters, retold until they became global? Or was there truly a worldwide cataclysm, a flood so vast it etched itself into the DNA of civilization? This is where archaeology meets imagination and where the boundaries blur between fact and myth. Picture this: a band of prehistoric humans standing on the edge of a vast plain, their world painted in hues of green and gold as the Ice Age retreats. Mammoths lumber in the distance, their silhouettes fading into the mist of melting glaciers. The tribe has hunted here for generations. Their stories, their tools, their lives are tied to this land. And then, something begins to change. The rivers swell. The ground, once firm beneath their feet, turns to marsh. Fish leap in flooded streams where once only dust blew. Slowly, the horizon itself seems to move closer, as the sea creeps inland, day by day, year by year. To them, this was not science. It was the wrath of unseen forces. Archaeology allows us to reconstruct this drama. Imagine the people living along the shores of the Persian Gulf during the Ice Age. At that time, it wasn't a gulf at all, but a fertile river valley, fed by the Tigris and Euphrates, where early humans may have thrived. When the seas rose, this lush cradle was swallowed. What remained? A memory of a world lost to water. A memory that could evolve into Mesopotamia's flood myths, retold thousands of years later. Let us move to another continent. In what is now North America, immense glacial lakes, ancient reservoirs locked in ice, occasionally burst their icy prisons. When Lake Agassiz finally drained, the floodwaters roared across the land, reshaping rivers and plains in days. Imagine being a hunter, seeing a wall of water blot out the horizon, carrying trees, stones, and even animals in its merciless surge. To survive such a thing, only to retell it around the fire, would mark you forever. The language of myth is shaped by such events. The gods punished us with a flood. The waters cleansed the earth. Only the chosen survived. These are not just tales of morality. They are desperate attempts to give meaning to a chaos no human mind could fully understand. Think of the stories from Aboriginal Australia. For tens of thousands of years, these communities preserved oral traditions of landscapes now underwater. Modern science has confirmed that many of these accounts, like those describing once dry coastal plains, correspond to real geography drowned thousands of years ago. Oral memory, passed from mouth to ear for untold generations, became myth, but it began as history. And then there is the haunting question of Atlantis. Plato's legendary tale of a great civilization swallowed by the sea may be philosophy dressed as history. But is it coincidence that similar myths exist across cultures? From the Pacific Islands, where entire lands were said to sink, to South America, where flood myths explain the rebirth of humanity. To bring this closer, let's walk into the imagination of a prehistoric survivor. You are the child of the tribe, living near the Black Sea basin before the flood. The world is generous. Fish teem in the rivers, wild grain grows thick on the plains, and your people thrive. Then one season, the waters rise higher than ever before. You hear the elders whisper, nervous voices around the fire. The next year, the rivers overflow again, swallowing fields. Then one day, the sea itself breaks through, a roar like thunder tearing the earth. Walls of water devour villages, forests, and even hills. You cling to a carved boat, drifting on endless water. Everything you knew is gone. When generations later your descendants tell this story, they do not speak of erosion or sea levels. They speak of divine wrath, of the Great Flood. Archaeologists and historians today sift through these echoes. They compare myths with evidence of sudden climate events, with fossils of drowned forests, with coastlines marked by ancient settlements now below the waves. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. The myths are not random. They may be humanity's earliest coded memories of survival. But here lies the dark truth. If so many cultures remember the flood, it means the event was not rare, not isolated. It means our ancestors endured catastrophe again and again. To them, the world was not stable. It was fragile, unpredictable, capable of ending without warning. That fear, etched into their souls, is the seed from which myths grew. What does this reveal about human evolution? That survival was not just about tools or fire or hunting strategies. It was about memory. The ability to pass down stories, whether about danger, survival, or loss, became just as vital as stone axes. Myth itself was a survival tool. By remembering the flood, humans prepared for the next one. And so, when we read the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the Bible's Genesis, or hear the tales of floods from Polynesia, we are not just reading religious texts or folklore. We are hearing the voices of ancestors who survived apocalypse, encoded in the only language they had: story. The Great Flood is not just a myth. It is a scar.
The Great Flood myths tempt us with a simple question. Was it one global event or many local disasters that echoed across time? Here, the debate begins. Some researchers argue for a global flood, the kind described in sacred texts. To them, the sheer universality of the myth is evidence enough. How else could Aboriginal Australians, Mesopotamians, Mayans, and Polynesians all tell this same story unless their ancestors survived the same catastrophe? They suggest that during the violent transitions of the Ice Age, rapid sea level rise submerged vast coastal civilizations. Entire chapters of human prehistory may now lie beneath the oceans, hidden from archaeology. The myth, they argue, is the only surviving testimony. But many scientists push back. They point out that water does not cover entire mountains in a single surge. Geology leaves evidence, and no global flood layers have been found across every continent. Instead, they suggest a different explanation: many floods remembered as one. Take Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates frequently overflowed. Ancient scribes lived in a land that could be devastated by sudden river floods. For them, a great inundation was not a memory. It was a reality. Perhaps the biblical flood story is an echo of one such regional disaster, exaggerated and woven into theology. But others point to the Black Sea flood hypothesis. Geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed that around 5600 BCE, Rising seas from the Mediterranean crashed into the Black Sea basin, flooding vast settlements. For local farmers, this would have been the end of their world. But critics argue that newer data challenges the scale of this event. Was it truly sudden, or a slower encroachment stretched over centuries? The debate continues. Meanwhile, in North America, the Missoula floods show how nature can unleash destruction on an unimaginable scale. Ice dams burst, sending torrents racing across Washington state, carving landscapes still visible today. To local hunter-gatherers, it must have been an apocalypse. Yet again, this was not worldwide, it was regional, albeit catastrophic. And then there is the controversial Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Some scientists claim that around 12,900 years ago, a comet or fragments of a disintegrating asteroid struck Earth, triggering sudden climate cooling, wildfires, and massive floods as ice sheets melted. If true, this could explain why so many flood myths exist. Humanity may have lived through a near-extinction event, encoded forever in story. Critics, however, dismiss this theory, arguing that evidence for cosmic impact is inconclusive. So what are we left with? On one side, myths that seem too widespread, too consistent to ignore. On the other, science reminding us that floods are common, localized, and devastating enough on their own to explain the stories. But perhaps both are true. Perhaps myths are not about one flood, but the memory of many. Imagine living in an age when sea levels rose over 120 meters globally. Imagine being part of a community whose coastline shifted not in decades, but within a single lifetime. For those people, the ocean was a predator, always hungry, always advancing. Would it not be natural to tell stories of a flood that consumed the earth? Here lies the darker possibility. What if entire civilizations did exist before the sea rose, and we simply haven't found them yet? Most of human settlement has always clustered near coasts. If those coasts are now underwater, then countless archaeological sites, perhaps entire cities, are hidden beneath the waves. In other words, the flood myths may not just preserve memory of disaster, but of lost civilizations. This speculation has fueled both science and fantasy. Some see in it the seeds of Plato's Atlantis, a metaphor for a great culture erased by the sea. Others dismiss Atlantis as fiction, a paraphilosophical parable. Yet the image remains powerful, feeding into the question, if civilizations did rise before the flood, what have we lost? What knowledge drowned with them? And so we stand between two truths. Scientifically, there was no single flood that covered the world. But historically, there were many floods, each catastrophic to the people who endured them. Myth wove these into one grand narrative, passed across generations, cultures, and continents. The flood myth is not a lie. It is not fiction. It is a tapestry woven from countless human tragedies, stitched together into a single, overwhelming story of survival and rebirth. But this leads us to a haunting reflection. If our ancestors lived in fear of rising waters, if they preserved their trauma in story, then what about us? As modern humans face melting glaciers, rising seas, and climate shifts, are we about to live through our own version of the Great Flood? And will our descendants tell myths about us?
When we strip away the layers of myth and science, we are left with a lesson, one that stretches like a bridge from prehistory to our own fragile age. The Great Flood myths are not only about the past, they are mirrors held up to our present, warnings whispered across millennia. Think of what these stories really tell us. Humanity has always lived on the edge of disaster. Prehistoric humans faced the Ice Age, sudden floods, and violent climate shifts. Their survival was not guaranteed. It was earned, day after day, by adapting, by remembering, by learning to tell stories that preserved warnings. Myths were survival manuals disguised as legends. Take, for instance, the hunter-gatherers of the Pacific Northwest who lived through the cataclysmic Missoula floods. To them, the earth itself could crack open, and walls of water could erase valleys in moments. They may not have written their memories in stone, but they told them in stories so that children would remember the land is not forever. The world can change. Or the Black Sea Basin. Imagine those early farmers watching their fertile fields vanish beneath salt water. They could have despaired, but instead, some migrated, carrying seeds, knowledge, and myths that taught their descendants. Nothing is permanent, but we endure by moving, by adapting. Isn't that the very essence of human evolution? Even the biblical story of Noah, whether historical or not, contains a symbolic truth. Survival requires foresight. Noah builds an ark before the rains fall. The message is clear. Those who prepare for change will live. Those who ignore it may not. Now turn to our own world. The glaciers are melting once again. Seas rise, coastlines shift, storms grow stronger. We face, in slow motion, the same forces that terrified our ancestors. What they encoded in myth, we measure in data. Rising oceans, flooded cities, shifting climates. And yet, are we listening? Or are we, like the generations before the flood, ignoring the signs until it is too late? There is something profoundly humbling about realizing that prehistoric humans, without satellites, without science, understood, in their bones, what we still struggle to accept. Nature is larger than us, and it does not negotiate. The flood myths are not only about divine punishment, they are about human arrogance. Civilizations rise, believe themselves invincible, and then watch the waters wash them away. This is where archaeology becomes philosophy. The ruins beneath the waves, the drowned valleys, the fossilized forests, they remind us of the fragility of our place on Earth. Our skyscrapers, our cities, our technology may feel permanent, but to the ocean, they are as fragile as mud huts. The same forces that drowned the lands of our ancestors still shape the Earth today. But there is hope woven into the flood myths as well. After every destruction, there is rebirth. After every flood, survivors emerge, carrying knowledge forward. The myths emphasize resilience as much as catastrophe. Humanity endures not because the world is stable, but because we are adaptable. Consider this. The Ice Age could have ended us, yet prehistoric humans crossed frozen tundras, hunted mammoths, crafted tools, and told stories. The floods could have destroyed memory itself, but instead those stories became the seeds of myth that connect us to the deep past. Today, as we face rising seas and climate change, we too can choose resilience. We too can prepare our arks, whether through technology, sustainable living, or collective action. The flood myths also remind us of unity. Nearly every culture shares the story, which means it belongs to all of us. In a world divided by borders, politics, and beliefs, perhaps we should remember that our ancestors, whether in Mesopotamia, Australia, or the Americas, all feared the same rising waters, all prayed for survival, all endured. The flood is humanity's shared trauma and our shared wisdom. So when we hear the story of Noah or Gilgamesh or the sunken city of Dwarka, we should not dismiss them as relics of a superstitious past. We should hear them as warnings, as encouragement, as mirrors. They tell us, you have survived before. You can survive again, but only if you listen, only if you remember. The dark truth behind the great flood myths is not just that they echo real catastrophes. It is that they reveal a cycle: disaster, survival, memory. And that cycle is still unfolding. The question is, will we be the ancestors remembered for our resilience or for ignoring the rising tide?
Water has always been both a giver of life and a bringer of death. It nourished the first villages, carried the first boats, and shaped the earliest civilizations. Yet, as the Great Flood myths remind us, it also has the power to erase entire worlds. We began this journey with a question: why do so many cultures, separated by oceans, time, and language, all tell of a flood that nearly ended humanity? The answer, as we've uncovered, is complex.
Archaeology, geology, and anthropology show us that while there may not have been one single global deluge, there were countless floods, each devastating in its own right, each capable of erasing landscapes, cultures, and histories. From the bursting of glacial lakes in North America to the drowning of fertile plains in Mesopotamia, from the surging waters of the Black Sea to the submerged ruins off India's coast, our planet has always been reshaped by water. Prehistoric humans, Neanderthals gone but Homo sapiens enduring, watched their worlds collapse and carried those memories forward in the only way they could, through story. And so the myths were born, not as lies, not as fantasies, but as encoded memories of catastrophe. To the ancients, the flood was not geology. It was the voice of gods, the wrath of nature, the mystery of existence itself. And in those myths, we hear a whisper of the truth. The flood is not just about destruction. It is about survival. That is the dark truth. Humanity has always lived under the shadow of disaster. Our ancestors endured fire, ice, famine, and flood. And every time they rebuilt, retold, remembered. Their myths are warnings, but they are also proof of resilience. Today, as seas rise once more and storms grow fiercer, their stories feel eerily familiar. We too stand on a fragile shore, watching the waters creep higher. The flood myth may not belong only to the past. It may be the story of our future. So perhaps the real question is not, did the Great Flood happen? The real question is, when it happens again, will we be ready? Do we truly understand the warnings our ancestors left us? Or will we, like the lost civilizations whispered about in legend, let the waves write the final chapter of our story? The flood myths are not just tales, they are mirrors. They show us who we were, and they challenge us to ask, who will we be? Survivors or forgotten voices beneath the sea? If you've journeyed with us this far, thank you. Don't let these questions end here. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the flood myths were echoes of one great disaster or many smaller ones remembered as one? And what lessons do you think we can take for our future? If you found this exploration as fascinating as we did, remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Join us on the next journey into the mysteries of prehistory, human evolution, and the unsolved secrets of our past. Because the story of humanity is still being written, and the flood is only one chapter.